This sound, developed by Maxime Audefray, is one of the most complex sounds in this series of videos on bass sounds. It's not just because it integrates percussive elements on top of an already complex bass sound, but also because it uses both additive and subtractive synthesis to create a very powerful sound. As you may know, a majority of synthesizers out there, be they software or hardware synths, use subtractive synthesis. What this means is that you use sound sources which can be pure waveform oscillators or digitally recorded samples or even wavetables, and then remove or subtract some of the resulting harmonics which compose the sound to give it its specific character. Pigments does all that, but it also offers another type of synthesis, which in fact is the mother of all synthesis techniques, which is called additive synthesis. Its name comes from the fact that all sounds are made of the addition of sine waves. If you want more details on this, please go watch my other videos on the subject, and in particular my History of Synthesizers and Synthesis Techniques video. I'll put a link in the description below. Anyway, so as you may have guessed, this complex sound does use additive synthesis in two of its engines. Let's start with engine 2, which creates the basic bass sound for this preset. If we remove the FX stage and listen only to the second engine, here is what it sounds like. So, as you can hear, a lot of things are happening here. This is both the strength and the weakness of additive synthesis, actually, or more precisely, of additive synthesis modulations, which include here complex filtering modulations. In fact, it is so complex that most of the time, the best way to get interesting results is to play around and fiddle with all the parameters, but it also helps to understand what's going on. For those interested, I will make another video to explain all the parameters available for additive synthesis in Pigments, so stay tuned or subscribe to the channel. But here we'll only look at the parameters used by Maxime to create his sound. So let's start with the basics. First, let's remove all the modulations, filters and effects and see where we start from. It sounds like a sawtooth wave, and that's not too surprising since we merely added harmonics here. Maxime uses a maximum of 128 harmonics, also called partials. That's enough to go from a pure sine wave to a sawtooth-like signal. So we're basically adding 128 sine waves whose frequencies are multiple of the note frequency. But Max also changed the frequency ratio factor to add more sine waves between harmonics, which has the effect of using more low-frequency partials to keep a total of 128 of them. And that's good because what we want is to create a bass sound, remember? Now we need to filter out some of these partials, so we'll use one of the comb filter presets here. And by changing the section of the spectrum we apply this filter to, we can hear some interesting changes. So we'll use LFO1 to modulate this section. To further add some movement in the sound, we'll add some random stereo modulation like this. Now, Pigments has yet another interesting feature in its harmonics engine called cluster effects, where it allows to select a window of partials and change their relative positions, thereby creating inharmonics, which creates a deeper, moving sound. So now it's time to play with the filter section. As you can see, the signal we have created so far is sent to filter 2, which is an emulation of a Roland Jupiter low-pass filter. The filter cutoff frequency and resonance are in turn modulated using envelope 3, which emphasizes the attack of the signal. And now all we need is to add various effects like chorus, delay, reverb, to give the sound some more depth. Now, if you don't want reverb, you can easily diminish or even completely remove it if needed. And it's now time to focus on the percussive part of the sound. Let's hear it again. If we remove the bass signal that we just created with Engine 2, we are left with this. The bass sound that we're still hearing is generated using a waveform that looks like something between a triangle and a sawtooth waveform. Now let's remove this bass part and also disable the delay to focus on the percussive part. Both Engine 1 and the noise generators are modulated to create this percussion effect. In the Engine 3, or utility engine as they call it, we're using noise samples as sources. We're also modulating the volume of the first noise generator with function 2 to emphasize their attack and also create this rhythmic effect, which is emphasized by modulating filter 1 as well, which eliminates the too aggressive high harmonics. Nice percussion effect, right? And Noise Generator 2 is just here to add some interesting virtual percussion attack to the sound. Engine 1 uses the same modulation on filter 1, hence generating the same rhythm as in the Engine 3. But the interesting part here is that it also uses additive synthesis, in other words, a harmonic engine, which allows us to create some tonal information in the sound using the FM ratio parameter. And we'll also use the cluster feature to prepare the sound for a bell-like timbre when we'll filter it later. Note the tilt and tilt offset parameters, which filter out the first partial, which correspond to the note frequency, of course. So the perceived note now depends on the second partial, which itself depends on the FM ratio. In fact, it depends only on the FM ratio because the oscillator is said to be atonal. In other words, it will generate the same notes whatever the root key is pressed on the keyboard. So now we can use frequency modulation itself modulated by a specific function 1 to get to this tonal sequence. The frequency modulation plus the filter shape and cluster parameters generate this bell-like type of sound. And when we mix it with engine 3 sound and enable engine 2 as well, we get the final result. A bit complex, but very powerful, as by just tweaking some of the parameters we just saw, we can generate an infinity of very interesting sound. The FX section does the rest. In particular, the delay plays an important role, along with some reverb and a nice touch of stereo panning and distortion. Oh, I almost forgot. Maxim also added an interesting control using the modulation wheel. It will determine how much FM will be included in the percussion sequence sound. Let's hear what it does when we control it manually. The idea is to make the modulator frequency vary and then use two pseudo-random functions to create a stochastic control of this variation so that it does not sound repetitive. To achieve that, random 1 function is merely used to generate a regular clock signal to trigger variations in random function 2, which will control the modulator frequency variation, a kind of FM if you wish. Of course, we could use a function to replace random 1 or even an LFO, but I guess Maxim, who worked at Arturia, wanted to show another way to use a random function in a, well, not random way. In any case, here is the result. Listen how the mod will now affect the regularity of the pitches in the rhythmic sequence. Et voilà!